I found out my childhood best friend was gay from a Facebook post. Not a dramatic coming out video, not a long confession, just a single photo of him standing on a beach somewhere I didn't recognize, hair a little longer than I remembered, smile softer. His arm was slung around another guy's shoulders. The caption was simple, finally done pretending. This is me. I stared at my phone longer than I'd like to admit. His name was Robert. And for most of my life, he wasn't just my best friend, he was the person who defined entire chapters of my childhood. The kind of friend you assume will always be there, frozen in time, untouched by distance or years. The kind you lose without realizing it's happening. We grew up 3 houses apart. Same street, same cracked sidewalk, same summers that felt endless. Our moms used to joke that it was cheaper to just buy food in bulk because Robert practically lived at our place. We were inseparable in that effortless, innocent way kids are before the world teaches them to overthink everything. Bike rides until the streetlights came on. Sleepovers on the living room floor. Late-night whispers about dumb stuff video games. Girls we thought we liked who would get famous first. Back then, I didn't have words for the way I felt about him. I just knew I wanted to be near him. Always. Somewhere along the way, that closeness shifted. Puberty hit. Awareness crept in. I noticed things I wasn't supposed to notice. The way his laugh landed in my chest. The way my stomach flipped when he changed his shirt without warning. I told myself it was normal. That everyone felt that way about their best friend. Spoiler, they don't. But I buried it. Deep. Because Robert talked about girls. Because everyone assumed we were both straight. Because it was easier to pretend than to risk losing him. And honestly, I think part of me believed if I ignored it long enough, it would go away. It didn't. High school pulled us in different directions. New friends, new schedules, different futures. The last summer before graduation, we sat on the hood of his car, eating gas station junk food, promising we wouldn't be those guys who drift apart. We were. College happened. Life happened. Texts turned into check-ins. Check-ins turned into silence. Years slipped by without ceremony. And now here he was. Out. Smiling. Free. My first reaction surprised me. It wasn't shock. It wasn't confusion. It was regret. I replayed memories I hadn't touched in years. Moments that felt heavier now. Things he'd said. Things I hadn't. Nights where the air felt charged, and I'd convinced myself it was all in my head. I almost scrolled past the post. Almost told myself it was none of my business anymore. Instead, I typed, "Proud of you, man." I didn't expect a response. He replied within seconds. "Hey, I was hoping you'd see this." My heart kicked hard against my ribs. We moved to messages. Small talk at first. Where he lived now. What he did for work. How weird it felt to talk again after so long. It was easy. Too easy. Like no time had passed at all. Then, after a pause that felt intentional, he sent another message. "There's something I wanted to tell you for a long time." I stared at the screen, thumb hovering, pulse loud in my ears. I had no idea that one sentence was about to drag the past back into the present and give both of us a second chance neither of us had ever planned for. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't want to, but because my brain suddenly felt like it was 20 steps behind my heart. I reread his message 3 times, like the words might rearrange themselves into something safer if I stared long enough. "There's something I've wanted to tell you for a long time." That sentence carried weight, the kind that presses on old bruises you forgot you had. I finally typed back, "Okay." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "I almost told you 100 times," he wrote, "but I never knew how." And then we stopped talking, and it felt too late. My chest tightened. I leaned back on my couch, staring at the ceiling of my apartment. The place was quiet except for the hum of the fridge. Too quiet for the way my pulse was racing. "You remember senior year," he continued. "That summer before college?" Of course I did. That summer lived in my body like muscle memory. Late nights, windows down, music low, the way everything felt suspended, like we were standing on the edge of something without knowing what came next. "Yeah," I replied. "I remember." There was a longer pause this time. Long enough that I wondered if he'd change his mind. Long enough for me to start overthinking every interaction we'd ever had. Then the message came. You were my first crush. I sat up so fast I nearly dropped my phone. My first instinct was disbelief, not because it didn't make sense, but because it made too much sense. Like a puzzle piece snapping into place, so cleanly it hurt. You, he added. Not some random guy. Not a celebrity. You. I swallowed hard. I thought about all the nights I'd laid awake, replaying moments where our knees touched on his bed, or when he'd fallen asleep against my shoulder during a movie. All the times I convinced myself I was projecting, imagining something that wasn't real. I didn't even know what it meant back then, he went on. I just knew being around you felt different. Safer, louder, quieter, all of it. I ran a hand through my hair, pacing now. Why didn't you say anything? I typed, even though part of me already knew the answer. His response came quickly, because I was terrified of you looking at me differently, of losing you. And honestly, because I thought you were straight. I figured I was the only one messed up enough to feel that way. That one hit deep. I laughed softly to myself, not because it was funny, but because of the irony. Two idiots, both hiding the same truth from each other, both thinking they were alone in it. I wasn't as straight as I pretended to be. I wrote back before I could talk myself out of it. Another pause. This one felt electric. What do you mean? He asked. I hesitated. This was the moment. The fork in the road. I could soften it, keep things vague. Or I could finally be honest for both of us. I mean, I had feelings for you too. I sent. I just buried them. The dots appeared instantly. Holy shit, he wrote. Are you serious? Yeah, I replied. I always thought it was one-sided, that I was reading into things. So was I, he said. That night on the hood of my car, I almost kissed you. My breath caught. That memory came rushing back with brutal clarity. The warm metal under our hands. The way his knee had pressed against mine. How close his face had been. How I'd gone home that night, restless and wired, wondering why my chest felt like it might split open. I wanted you to, I admitted. The silence that followed felt different. Not empty. Charged. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd been honest? He asked. I stared at his message for a long time. Because the truth was I had. More times than I could count. In quiet moments. In lonely ones. In relationships that never quite fit. Because part of me was still measuring them against something unfinished. Yeah, I finally wrote. Edo. He replied with something that made my stomach flip. I'm coming back home next month. I froze. Just visiting, he added quickly. For a friend's wedding. But I was hoping we could meet. If you want. I looked around my apartment, suddenly aware of how much my life had changed and how much of me was still rooted in the past. Meeting him wouldn't just be catching up. It would be reopening something we never closed. I want that, I typed. I really do. His response came with a smiley face I hadn't seen him use since we were teenagers. Me too. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was anxious, but because for the first time in years, the past didn't feel like something I'd missed. It felt like something that might finally catch up to me. The weeks leading up to Robert's visit moved strangely too fast and too slow at the same time. On the surface, nothing changed. I went to work. I paid bills. I pretended my brain wasn't constantly replaying old memories like they were trailers for a movie I'd never gotten to see. But underneath all that, something had shifted. Like a door had cracked open in a room I'd sealed off years ago. Robert and I texted almost every day. Not heavy stuff. Mostly jokes. Random observations. Complaints about work. But every conversation carried an undercurrent, now something unspoken but very present. Sometimes he'd send a picture of his coffee with a stupid caption. Sometimes I'd reply with something equally pointless. And yet every exchange felt loaded. One night, around 1 a.m., he sent, "Do you remember the treehouse?" I smiled before I even replied. That stupid treehouse had been our kingdom, barely held together by nails and optimism. We'd sworn it was off limits to everyone else. No girls, no parents, no younger kids. Yeah, I typed. The one your dad said was a lawsuit waiting to happen. We almost kissed there, he wrote. I froze. We did. Yeah, you don't remember? I leaned back against my headboard, heart thudding. I remembered the feeling, the charged air, the way my body had gone still, but I never let myself connect it to intention. I remember being nervous, I admitted. I just didn't know why back then. I did, he replied. At least a little. After that, the conversations got more honest. Not explicit, just real. He told me about the years he spent trying to date women because it felt expected. I told him about the relationships I'd been in that never quite felt like enough. We didn't say it outright, but it hovered between us. What if we'd been braver? When the day finally came, I picked him up from the airport myself. I don't know why I insisted on it. Maybe I needed control over the moment. Maybe I didn't trust myself not to bail if I had too much time to think. I stood near baggage claim, hands shoved into my jacket pockets, scanning faces I didn't recognize. Then I saw him. Robert looked different, not in a dramatic way, just more himself. His shoulders seemed more relaxed. His smile came easier. He had light stubble now, and his hair curled a little at the ends. Still him, just grown. Our eyes met. For a split second, neither of us moved. Then he smiled, that same familiar grin, and suddenly he was right in front of me. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I replied, my voice coming out rougher than I expected. We stood there awkwardly, inches apart. Too close for strangers. Too far for what we used to be. Then he pulled me into a hug. It wasn't quick or polite. It was tight, like he'd been holding it in for years. I breathed him in without thinking. The scent of his cologne hit me clean, familiar, and completely disarming. When we pulled back, his hands lingered on my arms just a second too long. "You look good," he said quietly. "So do you," I answered, and meant it more than he probably realized. The drive was easy, comfortable. We talked about the flight, the weather, nothing important. But every red light felt like a pause button, every glance loaded with something neither of us named. When we pulled into my driveway, he didn't reach for the door right away. So he said, "This is real, huh?" I nodded. "Yeah, it is." He smiled again, nervous this time. "I'm glad it's you," he said. Something in my chest loosened. That night, sitting across from him at my kitchen table, laughing about childhood stories, I realized something quietly terrifying. This wasn't closure. This was the beginning. And I wasn't sure either of us was ready for how much unfinished history still lived between us. That first night, nothing happened. And somehow, that made everything more intense. We sat on opposite sides of the couch, knees angled toward each other, talking until the clock on my microwave crept past midnight. Childhood stories turned into confessions. Confessions turned into long pauses where neither of us rushed to fill the silence. At one point, he laughed at something I said, then stopped short. "What?" I asked. He shook his head, smiling to himself. "You still do that thing. With your eyebrows." I frowned. "What thing?" "When you're trying not to flirt," he said softly. My stomach dropped. "I don't dash." I started, then stopped, because denying it felt pointless. His eyes flicked down to my mouth, just for a second, but I saw it. The air shifted. I stood up first, mostly because sitting still suddenly felt impossible. "You've got to be exhausted," I said. "Guest room's ready." "Yeah," he replied, though he didn't move right away. "Thanks again for letting me stay here." "Of course," I said. There was never a question. That earned me a look I couldn't quite read. Something warm. Something heavy. At his door, he hesitated, hand on the frame, like he wanted to say something else. "Night," he finally said. "Night," I echoed. I lay awake long after the lights were off. Every sound in the apartment felt amplified, the soft creak of the floor, the distant hum of traffic. My mind replayed the way his eyes had lingered, the way his voice had dropped when things got honest. I wondered if he was awake too, if he was staring at the ceiling in my guest room, thinking the same dangerous thoughts I was. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee. I padded into the kitchen to find Robert standing there in one of my old t-shirts, the faded one from college I'd never thrown out. It hung loose on him, collar stretched just enough to expose his collarbone. "Hope you don't mind," he said, holding up the mug. "I remember how you take it. Black. No sugar." My throat went dry. "I don't mind." He leaned against the counter, watching me in a way that felt almost intimate, domestic. Like this was something we'd done 100 times before. After breakfast, we decided to take a walk. Same neighborhood, same streets, different people. We passed my old house. His. The cracked sidewalk's still there. The tree we'd carved our initials into was taller now, but the marks were faintly visible. God, he said, laughing quietly. We really thought that would last forever. In a way, I said it did. He stopped walking, turned to me. I need to ask you something, he said. I braced myself. Okay, if I hadn't moved away, if I'd figured myself out sooner. He swallowed. Do you think we would have ended up together? The honesty in his voice undid me. I think, I said slowly, we were always orbiting each other. We just didn't know how to land. He nodded, like that confirmed something he'd already suspected. Back at the house, the tension followed us inside. It clung to us in the hallway, in the kitchen, in the space between our bodies when we stood too close without meaning to. In the afternoon, rain started coming down hard, sudden and loud. Summer storm, the kind that traps you indoors whether you want it to or not. We ended up on the couch again, closer this time. Our shoulders touched. Neither of us moved away. He glanced at me. Can I be honest? I let out a breath. Please. I'm scared, he said, because this feels right, and I don't want to mess it up. I turned toward him fully. Me too. His hand rested on the cushion between us. Palm open. Waiting. I covered it with mine. The contact was simple. Barely anything. But it felt like the answer to a question we'd both been asking for years. He leaned in slowly, giving me time to pull away. I didn't. When our lips finally met, it wasn't rushed or desperate. It was soft, careful, like we were both afraid the moment might shatter if we moved too fast. When we pulled back, his forehead rested against mine. So, he murmured, that was my first crush. I smiled, heart pounding. Yeah. And you're still kind of ruining me, he added. I laughed quietly. Good. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, two people who'd waited far too long finally stopped pretending nothing had ever been there. That kiss changed the temperature of everything. Not in a dramatic, movie scene way. No fireworks. No sadenergency. Just a quiet shift like something that had been slightly out of tune for years finally settled into the right note. We didn't jump each other after that. We stayed exactly where we were, foreheads still touching, breathing the same air. I could feel his pulse under my thumb where my hand rested on his wrist. Fast. Matking mine. Sorry, he murmured after a moment, like he was afraid he'd crossed a line. Don't, I said immediately. Don't apologize. He smiled at that. A real one. Relieved. We pulled back just enough to look at each other properly, like we were seeing new details for the first time. His eyes were a little darker now. Softer. Vulnerable in a way I'd never seen growing up. I kept imagining this wrong, he admitted quietly. How? I asked. Like it would either feel awkward, he said, or too intense. Like we try to make up for lost time all at once. And I prompted. And instead it just feels familiar. That word landed hard. Yeah, I agreed. It does. The rain slowed outside, fading from a downpour to a steady rhythm. The storm had trapped us together, but neither of us felt the urge to escape it. We spent the rest of the afternoon really talking. Not just about us, but about who we'd become in the years apart. He told me about the night. He finally said the words out loud to himself. About the relief that came with it, and the grief too. I told him how long it had taken me to stop measuring my life against a version of myself I thought I was supposed to be. At some point, his leg shifted closer. Then mine did the same. Eventually, his head ended up resting against my shoulder like it used to when we were kids watching bad movies on VHS. I miss this, he said softly. You miss my couch? I teased. He tilted his head to look up at me. I missed you. That one I didn't joke away. Dinner was simple takeout, eaten straight from the containers. We shared bites without thinking. Our hands brushed more than once, and every time it still sent a quiet jolt through me. Later, as the sky darkened, the mood shifted again. Not tense, just heavier, like we were both aware the night would eventually end, and neither of us wanted to rush whatever this was into something it wasn't ready to be. When he stood up, stretching, he hesitated. Hey, can I ask you something kind of loaded? I nodded. You've been doing that all week. He smiled, then grew serious. What happens after this? After I go back? The question hung between us. I didn't pretend to have an easy answer. I don't know, I admitted. But I don't want this to be a what if we never touch again. He exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath. Good. Because neither do I. That night, we didn't sleep in separate rooms. Not because of anything physical, at least, not right away. We just ended up in my bed, fully clothed, lying on opposite sides at first, talking in the dark, sharing thoughts we'd never said out loud because they'd never felt safe before. At some point, he rolled onto his side. I felt his arm slide around my waist, tentative. "Is this okay?" he whispered. I covered his hand with mine. "Yeah, it is." He pressed closer, fitting against me like he always had, like our bodies remembered something our mouths were still catching up to. I felt his breath warm against the back of my neck. Neither of us slept much, but for the first time in a long time, lying awake didn't feel lonely. It felt like standing at the edge of something real. And neither of us stepped back. Morning came quietly. No alarm, no ruse, just soft light creeping through the blinds and the steady, unfamiliar comfort of another person breathing beside me. I woke first. Robert was still asleep, turned toward me now, one arm draped loosely across my chest like it had always belonged there. His face looked younger like this, unguarded, lips slightly parted, brow relaxed. For a second, I just watched him try to reconcile the boy I grew up with and the man lying in my bed. I felt something settle in my chest, heavy, but good. Real. When he stirred, it was slow. A small shift. A quiet inhale. Then his eyes opened. For half a second, confusion flickered. Then recognition. "Oh," he murmured, voice rough with sleep. "Hey," I said softly. He smiled. Not surprised. Not embarrassed. Just content. We didn't move right away. No scrambling for space. No acuerdo recalibración. His hand tightened slightly where it rested on me, like he was grounding himself in the moment. "Last night wasn't a dream, right?" he asked. I huffed a quiet laugh. "Pretty sure I'd know if I was capable of imagining you stealing all my blankets." He smiled wider at that and pressed his forehead against my shoulder. "Good." Eventually, we got up. Coffee again. Toast this time. We moved around each other easily, bumping shoulders, exchanging glances that felt almost shy now that the tension had softened into something warmer. Later that afternoon, we drove out to the old lake on the edge of town. We hadn't planned it. It just came up naturally, like our bodies remember the route before our minds caught up. Same parking lot. Same cracked wooden dock. The water was calmer than I remembered, reflecting the sky in a way that made everything feel suspended. We sat at the edge, shoes off, feet dangling over the water. "I used to come here alone after you left," he admitted suddenly. I turned to him. Yeah. I didn't know why at the time. Just felt like something was unfinished. He glanced at me. Guess I wasn't wrong. I swallowed. "I thought about you more than I should have," I confessed. "Especially when things didn't work out with someone. I kept thinking I was comparing them to a version of you that didn't exist anymore." He nudged my knee with his. "Maybe it still does." That night, things finally crossed the line we'd been hovering near. Not hurried, not reckless, intentional. It started with another kiss deeper this time, less cautious. His hands traced my back like he was relearning familiar ground. Mine settled at his hips, steady but sure. When we moved toward the bedroom, it felt less like escalation and more like continuation. I won't pretend it was perfect. There were pauses, soft laughs, moments where we checked in with each other in quiet voices, making sure we were still on the same page. But that only made it more intimate, more real. Afterward, tangled together under the sheets, he rested his head on my chest. "You know," he said, voice low, "this kind of ruins my excuse for why I never dated anyone seriously in high school." I smiled into his hair. Yeah. Turns out I was just in love with my best friend." I closed my eyes, letting the truth of that settle. The next day came too quickly. Suitcase by the door. Shoes back on. Reality knocking politely but firmly. At the airport, we stood close but didn't cling. There was no dramatic goodbye. No promises we couldn't keep. Instead, he leaned in and pressed his forehead to mine. "This doesn't end here," he said. "No," I agreed. "It doesn't." As I watched him disappear past security, I felt something unexpected. Not loss. Hope. Because for the first time, our story didn't feel like something we'd missed. It felt like something we were finally choosing. We didn't pretend distance wouldn't be hard. The first week after he left, everything felt louder. My apartment. My thoughts. Even the bed felt too big again, like it had reset overnight. But this time, the quiet didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like anticipation. We called each other instead of texting now. Actual phone calls. Long ones. The kind where you forget what time it is because the conversation keeps drifting past, present, future, all blurring together. Sometimes we talked about nothing. Sometimes we talked about everything. One night, he admitted something that stuck with me. I think part of why I stayed in that city so long, he said, was because it was far enough away from you that I didn't have to confront what I never finished. I lay back on my couch, staring at the ceiling again, but this time, smiling. Funny, I said. I think part of why I never left was because some stupid part of me thought you'd come back. He was quiet for a second. I'm really glad I did, he said. A month later, I visited him. New city, new apartment, new version of Robert, who still somehow felt exactly the same. He showed me his favorite coffee shop, the park where he ran in the mornings, the grocery store where the cashier flirted with him shamelessly, making me laugh harder than I should have. That weekend wasn't about nostalgia. It was about seeing how we fit now. And the answer surprised both of us. We weren't clinging to the past. We weren't trying to recreate something frozen in time. We were building something new with better communication, fewer fears, and a lot more honesty than two scared teenagers ever could have managed. On my last night there, lying tangled together, he traced lazy patterns on my chest. You ever think about how close we were to missing this entirely? He asked. All the time, I admitted. Kind of terrifying. Kind of makes it better too, I said. Like we earned it. He smiled at that, pressing a kiss just below my collarbone. A few months later, he moved back. Not for me alone, life is more complicated than that, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't part of the decision. We took it slow. Separate places. Our own routines. But we spent more nights together than apart. One evening, sitting on my porch with beers, watching the sun dip low, he nudged my shoulder. You know, he said, if I'd come out back then, everything would have been different. I thought about it. Really thought. Maybe, I said, but I don't think it would have been better. He raised an eyebrow. Yeah, we needed to grow into ourselves first, I continued. Otherwise, we would have broken under the weight of it. He leaned back, considering that, then smiled. Guess I like the timing we ended up with. So do I. Because some stories aren't meant to happen when you're young and scared and guessing. Some stories wait. And when they finally begin, they don't feel rushed or overdue. They feel right. A year passed faster than I expected. Not in big, dramatic leaps, but in small moments that stacked quietly on top of each other until one day I realized this wasn't something fragile anymore. It wasn't something we were trying. It was just life. Robert moved into a place 2 blocks from mine at first. Close enough to feel intentional. Far enough to breathe. We cooked together more than we went out. Learned each other's routines. His bad habit of stealing my hoodies. My tendency to overthink silence. None of it felt like a deal breaker. It felt human. One night, we ended up back on that same street where we grew up. Not planned. Just driving. Talking. Laughing. Then suddenly we were there parked under the old streetlight that used to flicker when we were kids. We got out and walked. Slowly. The houses look smaller now. The memories bigger. We stopped in front of his old place. Do you ever think about who we were here? He asked. All the time, I said. Mostly I just want to tell them it's going to be okay. He smiled softly. I want to tell them they weren't crazy. We walked down to the end of the block, where the sidewalk cracked in the same place it always had. He stopped there, hands in his pockets. You know what still gets me? He said. What? I spent years thinking my first crush was something I needed to get over. He looked at me. Really looked at me. Turns out it was just something I needed time to grow into. My throat tightened. I reached for his hand. He squeezed back without hesitation. A few weeks later, we went to that wedding he'd originally come back for the reason this whole thing started. Sitting there, watching 2 people promise a future they couldn't fully predict, he leaned over and whispered, "Wild how close I came to missing you." I smiled. You didn't. Later that night, slow dancing under warm lights, his head resting against mine, I realized something important. This wasn't about reclaiming the past. It was about honoring it without letting it define us. Now, when people ask how we met, we don't rush the answer. Sometimes we just say, we grew up together. Sometimes we say, we found our way back. Both are true, because nostalgia doesn't always mean loss. Regret doesn't always mean failure. And second chances don't always arrive loudly. Sometimes they show up quietly, with a message, a memory, a truth finally spoken out loud. And when they do, you don't let them go.